Hi, good morning. It's morning for me. It's Monday morning. We hope to get this up by tonight or sometime tonight or tomorrow if everything runs well. You're now listening, of course, to the 3 weeks lecture series, year 2021, which is about the Maimonidean Controversies. The title of the series is, of course, Fundamental Disagreement, the Maimonidean Controversies of the Middle Ages. As I mentioned last week, we had to, because of so much material, had to add an extra one. So this is going to be a grand total of 7 lectures. Today's number 5 out of 7. This is the extra one that was added. And so the title of today's lecture is, the 5th lecture is Jews Burning Books, the Controversy in Montpelier, Part 2. Okay? And today's extra lecture is being sponsored by Ari and Heather Elbaum. They did it the other day, and in between they had a baby boy. So I guess it'll be in honor of the baby boy. Mother and child are doing well. And we wish tremendous mazel tov, of course, to Ari and Heather, and to Howard and Judy, and to everybody else, the Suss family and all those. What a nice, almost is a surprise, but you know what I mean. Notice at the time they put the sponsorship down, they didn't have a baby yet, so they didn't say in honor of the new child. But we should go from simplest to simplest, especially that this is the 9 days. So you're always looking for a simcha. Now, without any further ado, I will go. As I said last time, the Rambam died shortly before his Mor Nevuchim was translated into Hebrew and started to be widely read, because once it's in Hebrew, everybody can read it. Remember, the Rambam himself said this book should not be widely read. I told you that last time. In his intro, he said, this is not for yeshiva guys, it's not for this type, it's not for this guy, it's only for a very small group of readership. Of course, you and I know, as soon as they say you're not allowed to read this, everybody's going to read it. The whole first section of the Guide for the Perplexed is about how and what not to read literally, particularly anthropomorphisms. You know, when it says God moved, it doesn't mean he moved. When it says God spoke, it doesn't mean he spoke. When it says God came down, or this, that, and the other, it doesn't mean that literally. I mean, that's the whole first part of the Mor Nevuchim. As I said, the entire approach of the Rambam was a terrific turnoff to many, because it sounded as if the Torah had to be read through Aristotelian lenses. If not Aristotle exactly, then at least through the lenses of Greek philosophy. In other words, not simply through common sense, which had always been the standard if you think about it. I've never seen anybody put it in those terms, but to me, that's how I understand it. Okay? To the Rambam and his fans, like in Luniel, the problem with common sense was it's not reliable, and it varies from person to person. For example, many had no problems with literalist readings. Some have no problems with God having a hand. I mean, that's their common sense. I mean, really. There was Ramosha Taku, and people like that. Others had a problem with a hand, but they didn't have a problem with the idea that God has emotions. In the Agadata, some had a problem with the story of the bug going up the nose of Titus on Tisha B'Av and eventually growing into a gigantic bird with iron claws. Or they had a problem with the sun standing still, and others did not. I mean, some said it's a miracle. So, it's a miracle. Anything's possible. Once you're going supernatural, you can go all the way. And others had problems with that. The point is, there's no system to common sense. And that bothered many. Now, others it didn't bother. Actually, there was no trouble at all. They liked it. It's what I always call the happy hunting ground of Nomianism. We only care about what the din is. Hashkafa is, interpretation of God. It says even Sugam, and this one says this, that one says that. But others couldn't stand that. So I would say that in the 13th century, the issue, people didn't formulate it in these terms, but the issue was, when reading the Torah and the Agadata, do you interpret it by common sense, or do you interpret it by science, as the term science was understood in the 13th century? This is not so simple. Does the Torah expect you to go by your own intuition? Which means different people interpret it differently, reverently, in a happy hunting ground of Nomianism? In that case, what does God want? If that's the case, literalism is not heresy, even though it may not be accurate. Is this the meaning of Dibra Torah B'Lashon Me'Yodam? I mean, the Torah speaks in very anthropomorphic terms, for example. Does that mean it's okay to understand it that way? Even though it may not be what it actually meant? Or does the Torah require you to apply objective criteria as science constructs them? In that case, deviations from these criteria are heresy. So the Rambam would represent the school that there is a right way of understanding everything, and any deviation from the right way is simply wrong. So no, it's 4 plus 4 equals 8. That's it. I'm not saying anything good and bad. It's just the way it is. If you deviate from 4 plus 4 equals 8, you're just wrong. So if you understand God to be 4 plus 4 equals 9, you're just worshiping something that doesn't exist. Or you become more loose goose. Okay? Now that's only part of the problem, because it got worse. The Rambam himself, as we have seen, at least I've tried to show you, was unique. He was a virtuoso of Torah Umada. He was I'm serious. He was totally philosophical, but also totally frum in terms of Shmiras HaMitzvahs and even lifting Mishuras Hadin. I mean, the Rambam was a frummy. Look what he said. He said, I never missed that tefillah Ezra in the morning, except when I was sick. I went to the mikveh every morning like a chassid, right? Maimonides. A lot of personal chumras he had, okay? And obviously, in terms of Limud Torah, I mean, who is it that put in zillion hours mastering the Torah? And in terms of reverence for Chazal, in the eyes of the Rambam, Chazal are philosophers. But they're superior to philosophers because in addition to philosophy, they have revelation. And so they know things about God that philosophy cannot know. So it's the old line, if Aristotle had been there at Maimonidean, then he would have said he believes in the creation of the world. You know, that kind of world. So the Rambam was like that. Now, there were others like that as well. People like the Rabbeinu Yonasan HaKohen and the Chachmi Lunyel that we talked about last time, and they were like that too. That's why they looked at the Rambam as a master. However, there were others to the left of Maimonides who privileged science but did not share the Rambam's religious attitudes. This had always been a problem already in the 1180s, right? In the Middle East, and the Rambam couldn't control them. So when he started discussing his Igeres Chiyas HaMesim, there was some guy in Damascus, I forget who, said, I don't believe in Chiyas HaMesim, it's just a bunch of legends, even Maimonides holds like me. Which was not true, but he couldn't shut the guy up. So these are people who use Maimonidean writings in ways that Maimonides himself didn't. Okay? Now, with the Rambam dead, Hutra Haratsua. People who shared none of Maimonides' virtuosity appropriated his mado, but without the Torah part, and without the Torah part, the mado part stunk. Why? Because it usually combined an attitude of cheap and arrogant skepticism of the Bible and the Talmud with a superficial education. This resulted in a willingness to discount or allegorize anything they didn't like. The allegories, by the way, that they came up with usually pretty lame. As people were talking about, were not great thinkers. Frankly, they were mediocrities. So Maimonides was not a mediocrity. So he was the real thing, and they were knockoffs of a bad variety. Secondly, the guys I'm talking about were notoriously lax in Shmiras HaMitzvos, justifying that with cheap rationalizations that really discredit them in the eyes of the frum. So to use an American example, the guy said, why do you ever wake up in the morning and go to chakras? The Rambam doesn't believe in prayer anyway. You know, see, like that, which is not true. I'm just saying, that guy's full of it. He just look at the sleep leg. So don't bring in the Rambam over here, right? The Sefer Mrs. Dose, I'll show you in a second, the Smog. Very famous work from Moshe Kusi, who was a French rabbi, one of the Balei Tosfos, who makes a very famous, he was a preacher, among other things, and a frum preacher, and he makes a tour of Spain. And he says, everybody under the influence of the Maimonideans now has stopped keeping tefillin, mezuzahs, scissors, snus. Go to the next one. Here's a famous intro from the beginning of the Smog. This is all very famous stuff. O Zos Darashi Lahem, I spoke in Spain, and I said, put your tefillin back on. Yoser Chavetz HaKadosh Baruch Hu Banim Rasha She'aniach Tefillin Miyam Tzadi. The less from you are, the more you need your tefillin. Okay? V'ikra tefillin T'sav Liyu Zichron Shayim Liyashin Derech HaTovo. The opposite. The tefillin are there to make you go back on the derech. V'yoser Heim Tzrichin Zichron V'chizik Miyoser Shegid B'yoshin Al Shmeim. The less religious you are, the more you need tefillin. It's like the Lubavitch, you know? The less religious you are, the more you need tefillin as a chizik. Okay? And I brought all kind of proofs. I'll go down to the bottom of the paragraph. And he says, in this year, Bishnas, Tuf Ksadi in the year 1236, Haisi Bisfarad, I traveled through Spain, Lehochichab, to give Musar, V'himis HaKadosh Baruch Hu Zrosai, and the good Lord strengthened my efforts, my arms, V'chalomas HaYehudim, V'chalomas HaGayim, V'chazionas HaKochavim. I was able to interpret them dreams and stuff like that. And I started a Baal Tshuva movement. And people took on a lot of repentance. And a lot of people started putting on mezuzahs on their houses, tzitzis on their person, tefillin, which they had abandoned already for a long time. Because they heard from people, well, Maimonides is just a token, it's just a totem, it's just a concession of Avodah Zarah. Now that's not true, but that's what they heard. You see, that's my point. Okay? And I went throughout Spain and other areas. Right? And they accepted my speech. And they asked me to write for them a Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, which he did in form of the smog. So this is a classic text, which was always quoted to show the effects of what I would call left-wing Maimonideanism. Now, that's not the Rambam. It's left-wing Maimonideanism and the devastating effects it had on Shmiras HaMitzvos Maisios. Okay? The worst of it, in my opinion, were that these guys were themselves raking b'Torah or raking b'mitzvahs. They were, like I say, mediocrities. But they argued that they were superior to the frum and unphilosophical pious Jews. And that was outrageous. So here's a guy who wakes up 6 in the morning to daven, to learn this and that and the other. And the other guy's sleeping until 8 and 9. And he said, well, I'm better because I'm a philosopher. You know, because I know that prayer is pointless. That was a real inversion of the hierarchy and undermining the traditional and usual hierarchy by trashing the pious. They really introduced social tensions into the small Jewish communities, especially in Languedoc and in Spain. Whenever the Frum criticized such conduct, the left-wingers justified themselves by pointing to the Rambam's writings, especially in the Moreh Nevuchim, which, as I said, is not what the Rambam intended. So, let's put it this way. From a certain point of view, he made a mistake of writing the book. If he only meant it to be read by a tiny, very few, that's not what happened. It never does. All this drove the right wing crazy with anger. Many on the right wing, which happens in disputes, came to view the Rambam himself as bad, as a John Hyrcanus, whose earlier teachings are quoted and are part of the Torah, but not his later stuff. So you'll maybe remember, not Yochanan Kohen Gadol. It says, "Al Talmud Atzmi Yom Moscha Yisei in Pirkei Avos." Don't believe in yourself till the day you die. No, don't say I'm already this in this age and I've been a Shomer Shabbos until now. I always will be a Shomer Shabbos. You never know. Shari Yochanan Kohen Gadol, because the famous high priest John Hyrcanus, the Hasmonean ruler, Shemesh Kohen Gadol Shmonim Shana. He was a Kohen Gadol for 80 years or wherever. L'vsov Nasa Tzeduki, and the end of his life he joined the Sadducees. Here's a guy who was Orthodox until he was old age and then switched to Reform or something like that, to use modern terminology, right? And so this became the sprach and the rage of the extreme right wing. The Rambam, yeah. Are you saying the Rambam was bad? Yeah, the Rambam's bad. What about the Mishnah Torah? Well, that he wrote when he was young, when he was from. In his old age, he obviously went off the derech. Look what he wrote in his old age when he wrote the Moreh Nevuchim. That's the attitude. And that's baloney, but I'm just telling you what they said. And look at the bottom. This is a text from the right wing. If it's true, the right winger said, that the Rambam was actually a frum Jew and a Shomer Mitzvahs, 90 years, we have other examples of people who were from most of their life and then went off the derech. So in other words, the right-wing rhetoric, as happens, the right-wing rhetoric went nuts, and they went extreme, and they started calling the Rambam names. I wouldn't say it's the major figures, but it's what happens when you have machlokas. The yeshiva students, the younger guys, the ones who like fights, they pushed the envelope, and thus things reached a boiling point in the year 1232, which would be about 30 years or so, almost, after the death of Maimonides, when the leader of the Frum faction, the Frum team in Montpelier, and the Frum team was smaller than the modern Orthodox team, okay? They decided, they did the following. Since they hate the fact that people are reading the Moreh Nevuchim, and they hate the fact that people are throwing it in their face, and so they wanted to get the others in the community to ban the internet, to ban the Moreh Nevuchim. Nobody should read it. And they tried to argue with them that they should do this, but they obviously had no common language. And so they decided, therefore, to force the opposing team. They decided to force the opposing team to cease and desist. That is, to stop arguing for the exclusive correctness of the philosophical readings of the Bible and the Talmud, the historical relativism of the mitzvahs, and for advocating that everyone get a secular or an Aristotelian education. How can you force this? The Jews had no state. Well, the only arsenal they had in those days was the cherub, a ban or an excommunication. That's the nuclear option. You do this and this and this, otherwise I put you in cherub. Really? Now, there is a halacha like that. But you understand, to put somebody in official ostracism, excommunication, that's a heavy move. The problem, of course, is cherub depends on consensus. If I say this person should be ostracized, and everybody listens to me, it's effective. You lose your clients, you lose your friends, the school won't take you, the neighbors won't talk to you, if they all play ball, if they all go along. In order for it to work, realistically, all the rabbis have to be on board. Here's a famous example that's often quoted. Is Rabbi Kotler when he started the Chinuch Hasmai, and he made sure the Rabbi Soloveitchik should be there. Because he said, oh yes, I want everybody on board, right? That's just a matter of classic old-fashioned coalition politics. Even though he's using them for his own purposes, Rabbi Soloveitchik was willing to support the Chinuch Hasmai, and that sent a message out there. You get it? So in other words, you have to develop a consensus. Otherwise, it gets vitiated. Okay? It gets vitiated. Just comes to mind. Rav Shach said, Steinsaltz is treif. The Lubavitcher Rebbe and the Ger Rebbe says Steinsaltz is kosher. So what is he in? You see what I'm saying? You have a split like that. So you don't have the effect of a cherem. Now, how do you get both teams in Languedoc and in Spain in the 13th century on the same side? This was the challenge to the leaders of the right-wing faction. Let's go. The two big names was Rav Shlomo and Minahar. Minahar means he's from Montpelier. Hahar, Montpelier, right? Rav Shlomo of Montpelier. And Rabbeinu Yonah from Gerona, who will become famous later on as the famous Rabbeinu Yonah, who writes the Shari Tshuva, etc. So he was his student. So one was the Rosh Hashiva and the other one was the Talmud. So these are people who have, I would say, a super Haredi yeshiva, small, inside in Montpelier, when the Rove are with Torah Mata. Okay? Or even to the left of Torah Mata. These were the tensions in this tiny town, which, as we'll see, blew up and created a fire much larger. Okay? Now, the right-wingers, like Rosh Shlomo Nahar and the others, appealed to the conservative half of the left wing. Not to the losers who weren't from, but to the genuine Torah Bata types. Join us in issuing a cherem. It is not about you. It's about the unqualified losers who are interpreting the Rambam in a loser way. But they were maladroit. The proposed cherem was a cherem prohibiting the reading of the Moreh Nevuchim and the bad parts, as they called it, of the Mishnah Torah. Whoa. And the prohibition was to apply to everybody. So basically, join us in banning, like I say, for computers and the internet and cell phones and all the rest of it. Okay? Now, the Torah model types, I repeat, these were great people. like Rabbi Yonah, I mean, he wasn't alive anymore, but the people of the Rabbi Yonah and HaKohen and the Chachmi Lunyel, great Rosh Hashivas of their own, but they were Maimonideans. And they were super frum. But they were committed, as I say, to the Maimonidean ideals with the secularism and all the rest of it. Okay? They found this all very offensive. There could be no truck with any criticism of the Rambam to say you can't read the Rambam's books or something like you're dissing the Rambam. And anyway, you say it should apply to everybody. So you're saying we should sign a cherem that we too can't read the Moreh Nevuchim? We too can't read the Sefer Hamada, which is part of the Mishnah Torah? Now the right wing tried to say, no, we're not condemning the Rambam. We're condemning the reading of certain of his writings because they have the wrong effect on the people, not what the Rambam himself would have in mind. But that was only partially true. Yes, the Torah Hamada agreed. Certain things are being misunderstood by readers, and that's why they're not from. But other things are not being misunderstood. You, the right-wingers, are misunderstanding them, and you condemn them unjustifiably, right? So in other words, a lot of things are basically like this. If you take it literally that God is a finger, or God gets angry, you are wrong, the Rambam's right. So you're doing the wrong thing. We are not going to sign a cherem to say we condemn that. We actually hold that's right, and that you, the Haredim, are wrong in your hashkafas. So there could be no consensus in Montpelier and in Languedoc, which in turn, at least to me, indicates the lack of bridge building by the right wing in the preceding years. The social relations between the two must have been pretty bad. You couldn't get a picture like we saw before with Baron Kotler and Yoshe Ber Soloveitchik. Obviously, Shlomo ben Ahar and Rabbi Yonah were real types like that. And they were turned off to the other side. And therefore, any attempt to sort of say, well, let's all join together, something, they had built no, what's the right word? They had built no creds up until now. They had not engaged in bridge building until now. Okay? So instead of accepting the reality that you're not going to get a consensus, instead of trying to dialogue seriously with the Torah Hamada element, the right wing breached protocol. And they went michus Medina, and they sought support for such a cherem from Tosfos in northern France. So basically, they're living in the place Baltimore, and they appealed to B'nai Brak to sign the cherem banning Baltimore from doing something. And indeed, Tosfos, I'm talking about French Jewry in the 1230s, the very end of the Tosfos period, Rabbi Yechiel Paris, people like Judas Sherlion, people like that. The last generation, shall we see, of the Tosfos. Remember, France is Ashkenaz, super culturally insular, super yeshivish, as we say before. You have no interest whatsoever in Munichol at all. And these guys in the south of France, on the Mediterranean, are writing to them far away. And they say, join us in jointly issuing a cherem, okay, saying that it's usher for anyone, anywhere, to read the Moreh Nevuchim or the bad parts of the Sefer Hamada, which would be the objectionable passages in Hilchos Yisodei Torah, in Hilchos Tshuva, and I don't know where else. Okay? But a big mistake had been made by the right wing, though they didn't realize it. To people like it's Rosh Hashiva, Shlomo ben Ahar, and Rabbi Yonah Gerona, it seemed that the support they got from Tosfos, because the rabbis in northern France, far away from this, did sign. Why not? That's a good idea. Like I said, let's ban the internet. It seemed that the support they got from Tosfos, who were the Gedolei Ador when it comes to learning, proved that the right-wing position in Montpelier was the correct one, and that Maimonideanism was treif, or at least contained treif elements. Look who signed! However, they had committed the sins of unilateralism and coercion. Unilateralism means you didn't get a consensus, you're just trying to force me. When you do something on your own, without getting agreement and consensus, you're going to get a blowback. You're trying to force me to do this in Shul. You're trying to force me to do this in my community. If you got an army to back you up, that's one thing. You ain't got no army, heck with you. And you're trying to coerce me? So in other words, instead of trying to persuade me that reading the Moreh Nevuchim is a bad idea, you're trying to say, we're issuing a cherem from faraway rabbis that's religiously prohibited. This was bound to provoke the most furious reaction and blowback. because nobody likes to be told what to do, especially when I don't agree with you. You understand? This is an issue that has been discussed for decades already. By this time in the 1230s, you had two opinions out there. Instead of saying Elu ve'elu, you're trying to say there's not Elu ve'elu. But I don't agree with you. There is Elu ve'elu. Right? And you're trying to pull rank by getting some big rabbi behind you? It's just wrong. Now, a cherem, not issued by a kehillah, indeed against the wishes of a kehillah, by other kehillahs from far away, this is not done. In the old traditionalist diaspora constitution, if I can call that, the unwritten constitution, the globe was dotted with independent Jewish communities once upon a time. I think you noticed if you've ever heard me talk. You have those autonomous coercive communities of yesteryear. So there's one in Rome, and one in Florence, and one here, and one in Paris, and a dozen here, and 2 dozen there. Wherever they're Jews, they get together and form kehillahs. Each kehillah was independent, and not subject to any other one. There was a broad consensus, but now you're trying to sharpen and narrow that consensus and force it on others. The broad consensus was on fundamentalism and anomianism and things like that. Yes, we believe in God, believe in the Torah. Now you're demanding more precise definitions, and you're saying, for example, that the consensus includes a consensus that the Rambam is treif, or at least the writings of the Rambam are treif. There's no consensus like that. Well, I don't care, I'm going to make you do it anyway. You want one army? You can't do it. All right? It's outrageous. You're getting others to tell our kehillah what to do? To the people in Languedoc, the Bali Toasters who lived far away, were issuing a ruling on something that they themselves, the Bali Toasters, did not understand. You have no right to ban Limudei Chol, to ban it. This is an old tradition in Klal Yisrael of learning Limudei Chol. Maybe you guys in Tosfos land don't learn, you eschew secular studies. That's fine. We don't tell you what to do. But how dare you say it's usher? That's a lie. And the Gemara had people that were learned in secular studies. The Gaonim had included people that were learning secular studies. There have been Jews here and there at all other times that engaged in secular studies. When you say it's usher, that's a lie. It's politics already. It's not Torah. It is not true. Okay? So the cherem did not really accomplish its purpose. By criticizing the Rambam directly or indirectly, they alienated the Torah Ummah crowd. In fact, it drove the Torah Ummah crowd into the arms of the leftists, which shows the political maladroitness of the cherem. The whole idea was to isolate the non-frum, marginalize them, ostracize them, and make them go away. Instead, it fortified them by saying the right wing are a bunch of crazy fanatics, and anybody that agrees with them is wrong. You should join us, the left-wingers. And more dangerously, it inspired counter-unilateralism. You do things to me without asking, I'll do things to you without asking. Thus, one of the most prominent Torah Ummah figures in Languedoc, the Radak, Rabbi Kimchi from Narbonne, launched a whole movement to inspire a counter-cherem. So if anybody signed a cherem, we're putting him a cherem. Because you did something that was a lie and outrageous, and therefore there's a din. If you're manada somebody you're not supposed to do, you yourself get it. And in fact, he went on a speaking campaign, a speaking tour of the communities in Languedoc and in northern Spain to get support for a counter-cherem, blasting the right-wing rabbis, and it got a lot of traction. So then the whole thing's falling apart. Because if A puts B in cherem, B puts A in cherem, it's like hakash hazedim. They cancel each other out. You see? And Zechil Hashem Shen Kamohu, and Judaism is falling apart. Okay? By the way, it also inspired counter-traction, because there were many who attacked the Radak. There's a famous, I'm not going to go into this now, we're not doing a seminar here. Rabbi Yehuda al-Fachar, who was the big, rich guy in Toledo, he wrote a whole thing blasting the Radak for going against the rabbis of France, and the Radak wrote back to him. It's back and forth and back. I won't go into this. Basically, the Radak said, I guess the Rambam didn't say anything that the Gaonim didn't say. About non-literalist or giving allegorical interpretation. You find it in the Gaonim. It's not the Rambam. Now, in Aragon, which is northeastern Spain, the official Kahil of Saragossa issued a cherem, and so did other communities, which means, I want you to understand, that here we are, that important Kahilos in Klal Yisrael, these are important communities in Spain, which in the Jewish map was a big deal, are now putting, I'll use modern terminology, they're putting Rav Shach in cherem, literally. Whoa! So, such things like this never happened. This is unprecedented. Let's look at the next one. You say that, this is what they write in Spain. You say that this guy, Rambam, is a heretic and a kafir. Here's what we say to you. The Rambam is Moshe Rabbein, is Moshe Maimon. So Saterish is some Moshe of Nebet Israel, Al Pi Hashem Bihad Moshe. This is the Torah which Moshe Maimonides, Moshe Maimon, placed before Al Pi Hashem Bihad Moshe. Which means we totally and categorically reject your assertion that there's something treif about the Rambam, and you deserve excommunication, which is quite a big deal, for saying that. So now all of a sudden the right wing was on the defensive to their horrified surprise. We're not supposed to be put you in here, not the other way around. Rav Shlomo ben Harp, the leader of the right wing, now wrote to the leading posek in Aragon, Shmuel Sardi. Shmuel Sardi is the Sefer Trumas. Basically, he's the founder of Choshen Mishpat. If you know anything about the history of Halacha, the Torah wrote the Choshen Mishpat based on the Sefer Trumas of Shmuel Sardi, who's a buddy of Ramban. So that's the kind of people we're dealing over here. And they wrote him a famous letter where he said, I never insulted the Rambam. I hold the Rambam. I quote the Mishnah Torah in my Shiurim, etc., etc. Okay, but the other side, of course, is, but you're dissing him on this. It was too late. An ideological war had been unleashed by thoughtless unilateralism. A red line had been crossed. The right-wingers were beyond outraged at the dissing of the Gedolei Hador. They didn't view their own cherem, which they issued, as unilateralists, but they did view the counter-cherem as unilateralists. So as they say in the Gemara, Satan was having a good time, because the two teams hated each other. Communities were now in civil war. So were families, spouses. So it was not a good time in 1232 to go and visit a community like Lugnel or Montpelier or Barcelona or Saragossa or these type of places. Because you can imagine the tension in the shul, at the mikvah, at the Kiddush Rishon. There's two teams hocking at each other furiously. It was in this fetid atmosphere of extreme partisanship that someone on the right wing crossed another red line. In order to explain this, you have to know just a little bit, a tiny bit, about the general context. The Roman Catholic Church, over the course of the Middle Ages, had a hot and cold relationship with Aristotle and his writings. Aristotle was around before Christianity, obviously, but ever since St. Augustine, I don't have to go into details, the same problem the Jews and the Muslims had. How to regard the Bible, including the New Testament, versus what Aristotle's writings. And, for a long time, the church didn't know what to do about it. Then they were anti-Aristotle. Later when they changed their mind. Okay? At the time we're talking about, in the early 1200s, the Roman Catholic Church was in an anti-Aristotle mood, especially in Paris. This would change later on. Let's go to the next one. With the Catholic philosopher Thomas Aquinas, who will reconcile Aristotelianism with Roman Catholicism after Thomas Aquinas reads the Guide for the Perplexed. He hates the Jews, but he's always quoting the Rambam. Not that big. But at the time we're talking about, they were anti-Aristotle. As a matter of fact, in year 1210, which is 5 years after the death of the Rambam, the church in France burned a bunch of heretical books, including the physics and the metaphysics of Aristotle. That's their holding. Now, in 1232, in the midst of all these cherems and counter-cherems and name-calling, some Jewish right-winger, that's never been clear to me, was Tom some idiot, or on the contrary, maybe it was a Shlomo ben Harp, maybe a big Rosh Hashiva. The sources disagree. Somebody on the right wing got it into his head to go and tell on the Rambam to the Roman Catholic Church, hey, we have a Jewish Aristotelian named Maimonides. Some of his writings are atheistic. They're not part of the Jewish religion. It is heresy l'chol hadeos, according to Judaism and according to Christianity. Therefore, it should be banned by the church and the copies confiscated and burned. Because the Catholic Church, at this time, as I told you the other day, was in the midst of suppressing the Albigensian heresies, and they were burning people right and left, and burning the chassim right and left, and so killing and burning and all that was just par for the course. Now, ironically, when Team A in Christianity had been fighting Team B in Christianity, the Jews were left out. All the story we've been talking about were taking place against the background, usually in which the Catholics, I'll call them the Catholics and the Cathars, that's how it works. The Catholics were killing the Cathars and so forth, and Jews were not being killed, except once in a while when they were in the wrong place at the wrong time. But now, the Jews themselves are dragging Judaism into it, okay? They appealed to the church militant, which I said before was in the midst of the bloody suppression of the Albigensian Apikoursim, and they said to them, right, Atem sarfim be'esh es Apikoursim shalachem, you're burning your heretics in fire? Umadua talimu aymi Apikourseinu. So why are you not noticing our Apikoursim? Because you're only killing the Christian heretics. Why don't you take care of the Jewish heretics? B'nei Ameinu Rubim Mina Makofrim. Our people are mostly, unbelievable, are mostly heretics, Mina Makofrim. Ki niftul dibri Moshe Mitzrayim. Though they've been seduced by the writings of Maimonides, of Moshe of Egypt. Asher Kosav Sifrei Minas. This guy, Maimonides, has written books of heresy. Ateb Mevarim Samina Shalachem. Hey, while you're burning out the Cathars, Baru no Gamas Aminu Shalanu. Why don't you burn some of our guys? But Savu Lisrofis Asfarmahem, and burn the bad books. It's unbelievable. A Jew, a from Jew would go to a Catholic and say this. But it happened. The level of unilateralism boggles the mind and demonstrates why our ancestors were always so afraid of machlokas, because it gets out of hand to crazy levels. Well, guess what? The Catholic Church was happy to oblige. I mean, they're burning thousands of people anyway. What the heck? It seems that the books were burned in Montpelier. In other words, right in the middle of this small Jewish community. I mean, how big was Montpelier? 100 families, maybe? So, you know, like the size of a shul. Okay? And the shul is divided into two teams. I know how big each team was. Two teams. And Team A calls the Catholic Church to go burn this farm of Team B. Can you imagine that? So it's in your face, which must have raised communal tensions to the boiling point. I mean, if they had a kiddush, I'm sure it was a fist fight. You understand? Now, as I said before, if it was in Montpelier, which is a small town, it's crazy. Do you see why I chose this subject for the 3 weeks lectures? Now, the location of Montpelier doesn't make sense because that's where the two teams were located. Other accounts say that the Catholic Church burned these books, the Rambam books, in Paris, which makes possible sense in a different way, because Paris was the headquarters of the fanatical Sorbonne, which at that time was a Roman Catholic institution, and they had a fanatical cardinal and archbishop. And so they did like burning books in Paris, and they did it very often. So it could be. The Paris location entered the Jewish popular imagination and the art scroll Kino's books because of the events of 10 years later in 1242. There's a whole story, which I'm not going to go into now, where 10 years after this, in 1242, under different circumstances, the Catholic Church burned all this farm, the Gemaras, Tosas, and everything. It's what we are going to mention in Tisha B'Av this coming week when you do Shali's Roof of Eish from the Maram Rottenberg. Okay? So, I'll get into a little bit more about that later, because the 1230. So if you say they burned in Paris here and they burned it here, it's like a Xera Shava. More about this shortly. But as regards the burning of the books of Maimonides, some of the Torah Ummah sources claimed that these Jews, these right-wingers, were happy to delate and rejoiced over the book burnings. If this is true, and it's an if then they were mamish fanatics. Like the Torah Karta types who go to Ahmadinejad's, the Holocaust Denial Festival in Tehran a few years ago. Look at this. Kiros hamordim aposhim yob desikvasab, right? When these bad Jews, now this is a Torah Amada source. He's referring to the right wingers as mordim aposhim. So when he saw it's not working, when they saw getting the French rabbis in Tosfos to sign the cherem isn't doing the trick, they arose in all their arrogance, and they dared to say Lashon Hara, and they went, right, among each other, and they started having bull sessions. And in the bull sessions of the right wing, they said, why are we driving yourselves crazy? Give it to the Catholic Church, the Kamorim, the priests. Get the big shots, the cardinals, and the tzeirim would be the friars, okay? You know, the priests, the Franciscans, the Dominicans. To send to the ends of the earth, right? And tell the Catholics to go and pursue the Jewish heretics, and to be to exterminate the evil nose, get rid of all the Rambam books. Keep going, next one. They said to the Catholic Church, we have heretical books. B'shem Mado, the Sefer Mado, Umora, Yikru, Yedeim Damim Maleu. These books are full of blood. You, the Catholics, are supposed to protect the entire public from heresy. So that means you're supposed to protect the Christians from Christian heresy, but you're also supposed to protect, they said, the Jewish communities that live among you from Jewish heresy. Kamonu kakamochem. You and us are the same. Kumasu aleim kli katzigum, and it presented the Rambam stuff as something empty. Ridfu maher achem kisasigum. Go after them and catch them, meaning catch these books. Ba'aru be'esh Moshe Wasam, burn them with fire. Lo toshuva achalosim, do a complete job. Kirbel matonas. And the Catholics weren't interested in this, so these right wingers gave them bribes. They gave them matonas. And they gave the Catholics shalach manas to persuade them to burn the Jewish books. L'kulam nasan chalifas migdonos, and they gave them clothes and all kind of bribes. Ad she'uver einehem, till they blinded the Catholics, levashtam levoshes pneim, to the eternal shame of the right wing. Ubavon ador hishlimum natsi Hashem zon libam, and unfortunately they were able to carry out their bad design. V'halol rishayim al tabas nasham, right? And these wicked right wingers, hayom ahu kavo aleim yom mishta v'alzar machrim. They were so happy with what they did that the day they burned the Rambam's farm, they made like a yontif, like, you know, like a Purim. You know, if when something good happens, you're supposed to commemorate every year. Okay? And so, there's real fanaticism. Burning Jewish books was a first. Operating through the Catholic Church was a first. Both the left wing and the Torah Amada were, of course, beyond outrage. In Egypt, the Rambam's son, Avraham ben Aram, was still alive. Classy as always. He said, let it go. I'm telling the left wingers, don't retaliate. Let there be no fights. Look, they're doing my father a favor. They're doing a favor to my father's books by burning them. It's a compliment, like Eliyahu Navi. Because Eliyahu went to heaven in a fire. So when they burned my father's books to go to heaven, right? Look what the Rambam wrote. This is Avraham ben Rambam. Ma baru omrim ki baru divichamudos. What do you think that they burned when they burned these precious books? Yokar mizal, more precious than gold. Eish ochla hema. My father's books are like the Torah. Eish ochla. They themselves are consuming fire. The eish tochleim. How do you think regular fire can burn them? Bin lizos borim. Consider this, you fools. For Ozei Rahab, and those who help arrogance. Ein zeh, right? What? Ich zeh. How do you think this is? I'll tell you what it is. When you burned my father's books, they went like Tishvi, like Eliyahu Navi, to Gan Eden. like an angel up in Because like in the Shimshon story, sometimes an angel goes to Shema and Eish. So basically, he's trying to put the best spin on it. Get it? Trying to put the best spin on it. This poem, by the way, if you know a little bit, since this week is going to be Tisha B'Av, this poem obviously inspired Maim Rottenberg, because 10 years later when they burned the Gemaras, he used the same language. It's Eish Lochel Eish, and how can they be consumed by Eish? Indeed, Avram ben Arambam wrote an entire book describing the anti-Maimonides campaign and its results. Now, he was in Egypt. He obviously got reports from Langdog. Here is the English translation. The Milchamas Hashem, the words of the Lord, by Fred Rosner. By Abraham Maimonides in defense of his father Moses and Maimonides. So it's if you're interested in that subject. The left wing, however, in Languedoc, in Montpelier, in places like it, were so enraged that they said two can play this game. And so they hired ruffians who went to the right-wingers and cut out their tongues, which was not unknown in the Middle Ages. It was not uncommon for many centuries. If you catch a musser, they would cut off the tongue, so you can't tell you. Whether you know it or not, the Shals and Chuvas literature is full of cases in which they all shouted, can I cut out this guy's tongue? So they won't tell me. I did a podcast and I said, well, with the Maram Lublin, all about that. He said, don't do it because the guy's kids will take revenge in the Jewish community. Just bump the guy off. But cutting out tongues was not unknown. So look at what we're dealing with over here. Right? Look at what we're dealing with over here. Now, I just want to say, there's a historical problem, as far as I'm concerned, with this incident. Number one, did it actually occur? Number two, whose tongues were cut out? If it really happened, some say it didn't happen. I think it did. As Professor Grossman and others, the consensus is it happened. It makes total sense to me. If it really happened, then whoa. Intra-Jewish violence was mamish ratcheting up. And the tiny, weak communities we're dealing with in South France and Spain, they couldn't handle this kind of level of violence. Jewish communities are fragile all the time, very delicate. 50 families here, 100 families here, they can't have these kind of fights. You get it? Especially if it gets violent. And number two, whose tongues were cut out? Was it the right-wing idiots? Or was it the tongue of the Rosh Hashiva, Shlom ben Ahar, as some say? In which case, one of the Gedolei Ador, because he was a big person. In which case, oh my God. So, we're dealing with some serious questions over here. Abraham Maimonides, Avram ben Arambam, if you read the book, as always, when he heard about this, says the PC thing, which was, I'm sorry it happened, but they brought it on themselves. It doesn't make me feel good. I wonder, this is from Avram ben Arambam. Matiki advarm hotziu kol barsim. People who copy these, we say today, reporters, have spread the word. Ki sifri arabat tzadik abamori, sifri mornavuchim mado, sarfum son, that my father's books were burned. Hachelik yechad mi'anshe kal medinas Montpelier, b'koch hanosim osim. First half in Montpelier with the help of the Catholic Church. Ki amenosim reinachut mi'anosam. Abraham said like this, I'm not surprised the right wing was joined to the Catholic Church. Basically, their theology is very similar. Both of them believe in a goof. We say Ein lo demus a goof. The Catholics, I don't have to tell you, have taken the idea of Yesh lo demus a goof to the ultimate level. And even these other guys, they think that you can believe that. I didn't get exactly the report clear, the Rambam, Avram ben Arambam says, until I got a report from Akko. Megillah Sefer, Machlamri Shefer, somebody wrote me a book, a report. The whole story. And I got the report of how my father's books were burned. And how God, the judge of the world, punished the Malshinim, the right-wingers. The ones who caused the books to be burned, their tongues were cut off. And there was even a pasuk in Tehillim, which says, Yachres Hashem kol sifsei chalokas loshem edurgos. King David said, God should cut out the tongues of the people who speak bad. Kamu Murray Shov al Murray Tzedek. These bad rabbis went against Murray Tzedek, against my father. But Nasnu Charetz, and they tried to turn him into junk. Cholak libam, their hearts turned away from God. But even for them Peretzakas parts. And God punished them with a Peretz in the place of a Peretz. Peretz is a breach. So you tried to mess my father up, you got messed up. Shatu b'shamayim PM, Shom hearts. That's what I'm telling him. King David said, Shatu b'shamayim PM. Their mouths speak about the heavens, but their tongue drags on the ground. Well, in this case, their tongue was dragging on the ground. Okay? But Nelmu Pisyusam Kamikra Shekosam Teolamne Sifte Sheker Aderta Osad. And again, he's quoting that, those who speak Sheker against my father are now driven mute. Yeah, because they cut off their tongue. Yodea Hanistoris Yispark Yisal Yodea Kikorlan Mode Masher Chatoim Wela. And the good Lord knows I did not approve of this. This is going too far. You don't cut people's tongues out. It was not my plan. Okay? But Dama Barosham, it's their own fault. Hey, Mitzchayim ben Ashasem. It's their fault. If they would ask me, I would say, just let it go, turn the other cheek. That was my father's policy. Turn the other cheek. But that's not what happened over here. But I cannot say, looking over here, I didn't approve, but I cannot say they didn't deserve it. Matter of fact, let's put it this way. Mida keneged mida. So, look how bad things happened. So was the Cherem a success? Did it persuade the left wing and the Torah Mana to stop reading the Rambam's books? No. The opposite. They doubled down, and the right-wingers came to be hated, and neither side was willing to be flexible or conciliatory, because that is what unilateralism does. Indeed, some say that the right wing then hired people to cut out the tongues of some of the left-wingers, in which case it was a good business season for criminals. Narratives evolved and became part of Jewish folk memory, especially from the pro-Maimonidean types. There's a very famous account, which is not exactly true, but which nevertheless contains some truths and has entered the popular imagination and 10 million sermons and books and websites from Hillel of Verona, who was a student of Ben Yonah, who was a pro-Maimonidean guy. His father was actually one of the latest Balitosis. He was a firm guy, but he became a big doctor in Italy, and he wrote a famous book and an account to a friend. And look what he writes over here. This is lengthy, but it's written very well. He's writing to a guy who's skeptical about Maimonideanism. My brother, you want to get involved in these fights? Ask what happened 60 years ago. That a few right-wingers of the Chacham in Provence and Catalonia arose al Sifri Rabbeinu to attack the Rambam's books, and it wasn't Lishma, it was all for personal jealousy, no, as we say today, politics. That's his opinion. But they had no physical power to attack the Maimonideans. They were probably a minority anyway. So instead what they did was they used words. And they claimed that you guys are heretics. And they took a number of copies of the Mor Nebuchim and so forth. He went to France, to Paris. And he went to the rabbis in France and accused them of heresy. And most of them is from Polonium, Shum de Minus, and they said this is all minus, heresy. No, the rabbis in France didn't even read it. These guys read in selected portions. They interpreted it in a very negative way. The rabbis in France didn't read the books. Right? They weren't interested in that. And they listened to the Lashon Harnitz. And they said that all these copies should be destroyed, the rabbi said in France. And anybody who reads this to be put in cherem and his property confiscated, and to be excommunicated. And they weren't satisfied with that. They burned them. They burned all the books that they could get their hands on. And even at the church, they took the fire from the cathedral to light the fire, to burn the books. Vakom Revere and Aish, and the Catholic priest in one set the fire, from Nasnu Alem Venisra, from Rechovir Paris, Leni Kolam, and so the Rambam's books, according to this account, were burned in the streets of Paris publicly. Let's go to the next one. Also, Lashmiya Kol Shona Kfira, to publicize that this was heresy, and to humiliate, to embarrass, to condemn the books of the Rambam. And they sent these cherims all over Provence. And this started a sharp sword in those big fights in all the Jewish communities. And the arguments got bigger and bigger. Montpelier, it got into fist fights, the physical violence in the shuls in Montpelier, like I told you. But see Hashem Ra, and everybody was mostly Shem on the other, telling Lashon Hara. And those who were pro Rambam, this would be the anti Rambam, fell into Lashon Hara. Kisachar 80 sheker. They hired false witnesses negative against the Maimonideans. And they testified falsely against them in the French courts. And they didn't mind lying. And that's how they ended up cutting out their tongues. That's his version. And more than 10 people on the right wing had their tongues cut out. Hashem is avadav bezom es oivav. This was God's punishment. And everybody said, quoted the Tehillim, Shata b'shmayim piyam l'shon tehillah, because, as they say, it says in Tehillim, they speak against the heavens and their tongues are lying on the ground. Well, when these guys' tongues were lying on the ground, everybody quoted that pasuk. Let me get back to the story. Be in Paris. And what happened? Hashem Mishamayim Hishki Vayikam Chol Rabbeinu HaKadosh. The Rebbeinu Shalom got angry and was zealous for the outrage done to the Rambam. And he was zealous and angry at the outrage done to the Rambam's books. And as punishment, God sent on the Frummi communities in France his anger, and didn't spare the Torah of the French, of the Tosas. And of course, they all were burned. And don't say, come on, how could it be that thousands of Gemaras and Tosas were burned because 2 books of the Rambam were burned? It's no proportion. The Rambam is no small deal. He was like another Moshe Rabbeinu. But Tzidkas Tuliba, he was a Tzaddik Ador. But Osim Harm Kivin the Levi Shol Hosea Shem Ra Shalom Shem Shemayim. And when they burned his books, it was Shalom Shem Shemayim. Therefore, Hashem said, I'm going to wipe out Judaism in France. L'chein Charaf Hashem Bahem. God was angry at them. Shamra B'Seinu Borei Kamagdol Kol Shal Busha Tzira Kosh Baruch Bar Kamsa Tzarvei Chilo. And he quoted the famous Gemara, and I mentioned this because we're now in the 9 days. In a few days it's Tisha B'Av. I think most people are familiar with the famous account in the Talmud that the reason that the Beis Mikdash was through because Kamsa Bar Kamsa. And the bottom line is the guy was embarrassed at the Seudah, and Kamsa Bar Kamsa, these were 2 guys who were not particularly nice figures. And they were just embarrassed at the Seudah. And if that brought down the Korban of the Beis HaMikdash, then how about when you insult the Rambam? Don't be surprised if that brought down the Korban of the whole Beit Tosas era, because they destroyed all the books. That's the argument, okay? Ma Tomar, Rabbeinu Moshe, Mishnah Moshe Rabbeinu should be Zubo, Tzi, Olov, Shem Ra, Mitzvah Kfir, I Shamayim, Ilazos, Lisakam Sel. God will never forgive this. And he goes on and on, right? Eila Mechila, for Motzi Shemra. Let's go to the next page. L'chein Achi, Alta Tamas Hashem, Yisbarach Onesh Torah, B'nei Tzarfas, L'chov Rabbeinu Moshe. Don't be surprised if God burned all the Tosas books as a punishment for the insult to the honor of the Rambam. L'lo nesu ponim, and he gave no flattery. The Sifrei Talmud Shalem, even their Gemaras, By a skate with H on them. It was like a pillar of fire came down to burn all these things, because I think you know that the Catholic Church burned all the books in the street. As you hear Shalem called Galachos, all the Catholic priests were going crazy over this. And that started the Catholic Church to persecute the Jews themselves. Once they destroyed their books, they destroyed the Jews of France. Right? More than 3,000 French Jews were killed. And these would be the Frum, Besifria, the books were all burned. We also exert Shalim the Sifria Talmud, Gali and Amazet. And the Catholic Church prohibited the study of the Talmud, which is kind of true. This has to do with the events of 1240s in France. So I'm not saying this is correct. I'm saying that here's a guy writing years later who was a younger person in this generation. And if you're in the pro-Rambam camp, then you interpret the Holocaust that hit France in the 1240s as just punishment for what the right-wingers in France had done to the Rambam 10 years earlier. That's what he says, okay? Now, he says not 10 years earlier. He said 10 days earlier, which is not true, right? I didn't say this is true. This is not true. But this is the way he heard it. Being Tishal. So basically, you guys diss the Rambam. Now it's also to learn the Gemara in France. Right? Now, where is it over here? Being Tishal, Mio De Shosum Xer being Sravas a Madavamara. How do you know what you're saying? How do you know that the reason for this Holocaust in France is because of the Rambam incident? Enchod, I can answer you. Hine Ha'osa Mofis. The proof is, Shlo Siku Mem Yom, less than 40 days later, Bein Sreva Sifri Rabbeinu Sreva Sifri Talmud, that less than 40 days after they burned the Rambam in the middle, let's say, of Park Heights, they burned the Gemaras and all the Tosa and everything else in the same spot. That's what he said. But the Sar Vefer Sifri Talmud Vefer Sifri Amada, and the embers, you know what I mean? The burned paper mixed together, because it was still a whole large black site where they burned the Rambam stuff, and now they burn a ton of the Gemara stuff. And what was the idea? You see, Moshe Emes with the Rosh Emes, with the Rambam. Ki adayin ha'avei from a macham, v'zam zed davar emes v'golim b'forsim l'chol amin yudu gan. Everybody knows the story. Ulialter yadu, and that immediately demonstrated ki din shamayim haya, that this was a punishment from God. U'mimarim shalach eish ala shalchi yabis. And that God himself was punishing the French Jews. I repeat, the right-wingers, the French Jews, for attacking the Rambam. Now, this guy who's writing this, Hillel Burnham, was a Talmud, as you'll see in a second, of Rabbeinu Yonah. So Rabbeinu Yonah was the second in command of Shalom and Ahar. So Rabbeinu Yonah was the leader of the right wing, okay, in Montpelier. And now he tells a very famous story, which I think is a legend. But again, you'll read this 1,000 times. And it goes like this. Rabbeinu Yonah go to Barcelona, he was the leader of the right wing in France. When the Gemaras were burnt, 40 days later, I'm going by his story, then his heart melted, and his followers, and he saw he was wrong. And he said he's going to go to the grave of Maimonides and beg forgiveness. Binyan Asara, Pelivkos al Kivros Ayin Yomim, and to do like they say in the Gemara and the Kabbalah, to go to the grave 7 days in a row, Sheyim Cholo Asher Mol B'Sfarm, and to ask forgiveness for having attacked his books. And Rabbeinu Yonah went around and did a 180. And wherever he went publicly, and he said, I'm hitting myself in the face. And I'm ashamed. I'm ashamed that I opposed the Rambam in his books. And I am publicly confessing voluntarily, Moshe b'Tarosa Emes, b'Kulona Badoim. He was right and we were wrong. But in Makabla Me'ashav, and I'm Makabla myself, according to the story, L'aleches l'shtateach al kivro, to go to the grave of the Rambam, Binyan Asar with a minion, L'aleches al kivro zayin yamim, Kol chatosi al Yisrael b'Rabbeinu Moshe b'Maimon shedibarti v'veisin neged Swarv, Koloshan Azeh, on based in Paris. He gave this speech in the synagogue in Paris right after the burning. Let's go to the next one. Lifting a kahal and nosim and exera to the surviving French Jews. V'yotzim mishab, b'bol Montpelier, Iro, and he went down to Montpelier. V'yomer came b'beis ha'knesset shel Barcelona. So he gave this speech in Montpelier and then in Barcelona in Spain. But Maimon called kahal.
in a public speech, because Nafal Pachad Rabbeinu called Kilas, and then the covet of the Rambam hit everybody in a big way. Chomish Aparp Negro Kibbul Shamayim Below. And the anti-Maimonideans were influenced by this, and they also repented, according to this version. Rabbeinu Yonah Kavi Shivasa in Barcelona, and Rabbeinu Yonah stayed for a while and made a yeshiva in Barcelona. And he quoted the Rambam in every shir. And the Rambam said it, I'm not going to argue against it. So he did a 180 according to this. With all this, he didn't escape punishment, but because he delayed doing what he was supposed to do, which is go to the Middle East and go beg forgiveness on the grave of the Rambam. Being in Spain, he basically forgot about the whole thing. Toledo. He went to Toledo and from there to go to the Middle East, to the Rambam's grave. But Yosef Sham, and being in Toledo, they begged him in Spain to stay and run a yeshiva in Toledo for a little while. And he agreed with Kabashim Gedol. He set up a big yeshiva, and that killed him. I'll be Shatarasi Kostu Toledo, even though it was a big tzaddik. In Kol Mirka Obad, he didn't escape the punishment for his great sin. Kisham Nisham Lesumulo, Shamachla V'chavato Meis Pisam B'misa Shem Uzacha. He died in some bad way. He said, I don't want to say what. But Karol came Bavanichan and then it was because he didn't keep his promise. Keep Eisi Tzis Neshama Haitzoko Rabbeinu. Because on his deathbed he cried, I apologize to the Rambam. Cholosim V'shkiach Hanidram Nitzolo V'nikapelhem Bosim Shenisrashu Tomer Nichrusu. Those who keep their vows survive, and those who don't. And if you ask me a question, the author says, how do I know this story about the Rabbeinu Yonah? Ashiva, I'll answer you. In Barcelona, this is Hill of Verona. Yashavti Gimel Shanim. I learned in the yeshiva in Barcelona for 3 years. V'shimashil between Rabbeinu Yonah, and I was a Talmud of Rabbeinu Yonah, who had Tzadik Karol Yom Tzeisim Barcelona. No, Sipurlini Piv. And he himself, Rabbeinu Yonah, told me everything I just told you, os ba'os, word for word. Kasher Kosaf Toledo, Kachal Shasaf, Kolkara Yom Tzeisim Barcelona, Lechus Toledo. He told me everything that I described to you until his journey to Toledo. Lanis Barcelona, but also Toledo. And I was there when he left Barcelona to go take up the new shell in Toledo. And I kissed his hand like a Rebbe does to a Talmud when we departed. And he gave me a bracha. The maker called me Toledo, for some Kalkilas Toledo, and how he died in some bad way. I have no idea what he's talking about. In Toledo is well known. In Royal Farshbog covered Tarosa Hasiduso. It was a disgrace, so I don't want to mention it. Vinyalim Shoiba Montpelier in Paris. As for what happened over there in Montpelier in Paris, he died to me called me at Kill Montpelier. I heard it from the people there from Yosi Sham, Kamweo Takas, I was saying. And now other people are trying to start, he says in his time, 60 years later, an anti-Maimonidean movement. Now this is a very well-known text, and often cited and quoted. It's not 100% true. First of all, I don't know if any of it's true, but it doesn't matter. It entered the folk imagination, and any time nowadays, if you look at a Dvar Torah for Parsha Chukas, which is supposed to be when they burned the books in 1242 in Paris, they'll always bring this story down, because it's one of those classic Jewish texts. But in point of action, which is the reason I shared it with you, and it goes to show you that this was the raid out there. Now, really, I don't think it happened in Paris at all. It happened in Montpellier. That's what we think today, but it's a great story, and that's why it's remained in the popular imagination. I don't think it's true to Rabbeinu Yonah, so I'm apologizing, all the rest of it. But I could be wrong. I wasn't there. What emerges from all the accounts is, number one, there was a bitter machlokas. Number two, the burning of the Rambam's book by the church at the behest of the Jews. Number three, the shock that this act engendered and some kind of violent revenge that was perpetrated. And finally, the ineffectuality of the cherem, on the contrary, the lowering of the esteem of the Balitosis in Languedoc and in Spain, certainly among the left and among the Torah Mata. And there was no end in sight, it only got worse. The broad public out there, always anxious for a quiet life, yearned for a voice of reason.
They don't want to get involved in these fights. You just want to sit there, raise your children, earn your living, daven in shul. You want a quiet life, okay? So basically, there was an objective need for a vital center. Can I put it that way? Now, it's always that way. The broad public just wants quiet. And this is when and why the Ramban, who was born in 1194, now intervened with his famous public letter addressed to the Tosfos. This in the 1230s, before the incident of the burning of the books. The Ramban, not the Rambam, the Ramban, Moshe ben Nachman, is a classically complex character from Christian Spain, very different than the Rambam. On the one hand, he had a Tosfos chinuch. His teachers were French from the Bali Tosfos, who emigrated to northern Spain. He's in Girona, not far from the French border. And so he would have what we would call today a very yeshivish education. On the other hand, he was an MD, which means he had a secular education. So he was a hybrid in this particular regard. As someone who had... Now remember, the Rambam did not go to yeshiva. This guy, the Ramban, went to what we call today yeshiva. And he was a super pilpulist, as we know, and one of the great lamdanim of all time. And on the other hand, he had a secular education. He was a doctor. In his case, the Ramban developed along different lines than Maimonides in terms of mentality and hashkafa. Doubtless, the fact that when he was a teenager already, he was a member of a Kabbalah Chabura. Because one of the famous things about the Ramban's early youth is that some of the early Kabbalists moved to where he was, and he was one of their guys in their Chabura, strongly influenced him along anti-Aristotelian lines. So Ramban emerged as a type of yeshiva guy who went to college, but totally compartmentalizes. Plus, he resents the professors who dissed Judaism, and a guy like this, that I just described, holds Torah Umada in contempt in principle. Right? He has a college education, but he said, but that should have no influence whatsoever in the Judaism. Okay? So he was definitely a member of the right wing in Ashkafa, and he was also the greatest Talmudist in Spain and beyond. Arguably the greatest Talmudist of the 1200s. But he also knew the secular stuff. I might add that he was a relative of the right-wing leader, Rabbeinu Yonah of Gerona. Rabbeinu Yonah's aunt, that was his father's sister, was the mother of Ramban. All this could have made Ramban a polarizing figure, but he chose to make himself, to use his prestige, because I want you to understand, Ramban was not, without question, the number one Rosh Hashiva in Spain. Okay, let's get that straight. He chose to use his prestige to be a bridging figure, or maybe an intelligent right-winger who saw and perceived that things had gotten out of control. As a traditionalist Jew, the Ramban certainly saw the tremendous dangers from the disunity that was unraveling. Although Ramban strongly disagrees with the Rambam on many, many issues, as anyone acquainted with his writings knows, he does so b'soch ha'machane v'lo michutz ha'machane. In other words, he argues with the Rambam. The Rambam's a from guy. He's like another Rishon. He can strongly disagree. Believe me, he strongly disagrees with what the Rambam says. But it's like, Tosfos disagrees with Rashi or something like that, In other words, to the Ramban, Maimonides was a Godel Ador, among the biggest, and so he's totally entitled to that kind of derech eretz as one of the biggest Gedolim. And it was evident to the Ramban that Tosfos was simply clueless about who Maimonides was. And so he undertook to educate Tosfos. If Tosfos understood the true stature of Maimonides, they would withdraw the cherem and apologize, and all the bad blood hopefully would disappear. Such was the purpose of the public letter or two that the Ramban now issues. I mean, it was written to somebody, but it was copied and sent copies everywhere. Now, in order to do this, the Ramban had to sort of shoot the bull to a certain extent, because he was writing to the Bali Tosfos, the French rabbis, who were super yeshivish, beyond, super culturally insular. So he basically couldn't explain, in the terms that I tried to do, who Maimonides was. For people with the mentality of Tosfos, the Ramban figured that Maimonides has to be portrayed as a right-winger who had to do MCSY. He had to do Bakar Krovin. And he writes this at length. Right? You don't know what it's like. People read these Gaisha books. They're influenced by Galenus, by Galen, and Aristotle, and leads them off the derech. And the Rambam had to do, but Leilo severely. The Rambam himself didn't hold that, but in order for Kira purposes, and he says you have no idea what the college campuses are like, to use modern terminology. In a long, flowery letter, prefaced, of course, by the de rigueur declarations of self-abnegation, the Ramban tried to make Tosfos understand that Bnei Brak is not identical with Tel Aviv. You have no faith problems, but out there, many do. And you can't simply say, ban it, don't deal with it. Your comparison, the Rambam to John Hyrcanus, is outrageous. The Rambam was a frum guy to the end. In fact, that was a frum guy. He was a Gaon. He was a tzaddik. He was a doctic b'mitzvahs. You can't toss these terms around. This is the Ramban talking to Tosfos. Piartim, and remember, he holds from them. You should see the beginning of it. You guys are the greatest and all that. And he was yeshivish. So he really did hold from them. Right? But on this, Piartim peh levlichok, you just open your mouth without thinking. V'tartim b'dvarim nishmor l'rachok, and you said things that are terrible, that are pretty bad. But morcham al agon, yeshlonu godol mimenu shinasid tzeduki. You compared the Rambam to John Hyrcanus, who became a tzeduki. He needs those lo tzedaktim amatchem. You politicians are wrong in this. Lo dibartim nechon b'eved Hashem. You did not speak correctly about someone who was in Eved Hashem. Now, I don't agree with him, Eved, but he was in Eved Hashem. And I'll tell it to you straight. Because I'm not shooting a bull. And I'll tell you right away it is. Because I am being zealous for this Gon and for his honor. Why are you bugging the Rambam? And declaring somebody was a tzaddik into a Russia. Talk to people who know. Those who really know how to describe the Rambam. His praise. Those who knew him. See what they write about him. Malas chasiduso, tokef amunoso, okens anvasoso, gedulas yichuso, nidvas kiso, maisen efloim, b'mil hanorim. Look how he was a chassid, he was a muno, his anova, he was humble, he had big yichus, he was charitable, he did tremendous maisim, he wrote so well, biyosem b'yirsel, he dove b'choshek, all of his life, he was dove with the, in Yer Shamayim, with Talmud Yoshek, he kissed the Gemara knows he wasn't anti-Talmud, the opposite, right? His different Chacham Mechavkon, he wasn't making fun of the Chazal. He loved them. Hey, Machmed, Eino, Machmed Nasho. There is heroes. Ateres LaRosha. Imre Islam Swarv, if you actually ever read his books instead of just dissing them, in Dikdakim Bechibur, if you ever look closely at his writings, Hishmatim Osavai Bisur, did you actually find anything up from there? Look through all those halachas and everything. Did you find anything? Did you find Mavai Bisurim, that he's going against some Isser? Kal V'Chapal Chamorim? If Hishmit Kol Techan Gzera, did he omit any Drabonim? V'Losa Siyag LaTorah, is there any Siyag that he omitted? Im Helov Eino Meir V'Yadayim, does he not believe in Erevin, in Netilas Yadayim? Im Shachach Omer Begorim, V'Ofu Gvino Hanechov Avikom, all the halachas, as we say today from Dal Chalki Shechra, are in the Rambam. Right? It's not some left-wing book. He's got everything in there. Okay? How do you say he's not from? Hello, Hechmer Behavi Yosmidid. As a matter of fact, he's more machmer sometimes than necessary. Don't go like this, treat with contempt, facing the east. Who out there was able to beat the non-from? I think it means here the Karaites and people like that. He was a champion of orthodoxy. He got rid of the Karaites from their position of leadership in Egypt and from the royal court. Because they were afraid of the Rambam, they didn't cause any trouble. And he caused many Amaratzim to become frummer. So basically, you simply don't know who you're talking about. How can you do that? Okay? Now, where is the basic courtesy for a Torah scholar? He even quotes the bitter remarks of Shimon ben Yochai in Gemara Shabbos. Zonas mafarkas of Talmid Cham Loshikin, prostitutes treat each other with courtesy. Rabbi shouldn't, right? And then he says, and you're going to say this now, you in your little place in France, you think he's not from. The whole Middle East considers him the frumest. In Yemen, they mention him in the Kaddish. And you're going to say now the guy's a heretic? Or someone thinks he writes heresy? You'll cause like super mental problems for thousands of Jews. Why don't you take this into account when you write a cherem? The Ramban, interesting, also offers a modern argument. If you're too strict, they'll rebel. You can't tell people no cell phones. You know what I mean? You can't do it. And you're telling nobody can read the book. That's Xer Shein Tzibur Yochalam Baba. So it was a wrong idea of the cherem you issued on very many grounds. Furthermore, Bishlam made a murder buchum. You want to ban the murder buchum? I don't agree, but I hear that. What's with the Sefer Hamana? Right? I mean, really? Because he mentioned Gehenna and all this in a non-literal way. Even you guys, the Ashkenazi Sefer Rokeach, the big Makobel, talks about the same way. Not from Greek sources, from Kabbalistic sources. You know, the Makabolim are even bigger on Elo de Musa Guf, Eno Guf. Echad ve'en yochi ki yichudo. From Kabbalistic reasons, okay? So you can't say, you see the mystics in Ashkenaz, or the Frumas of the Frum, talk about the unknowability of God. So it's not a Maimonidean business. They're super Frum. And finally, in general, instead of unilateral declarations of coercion, try positivity. You can't, like I said before, you can't tell everybody no cell phone. As he says, the whole tzibur is not Hasidim. Hasidim will by themselves not have a cell phone. I'm talking about Hasid in the old sense, right? Pious will do that. I mean, you can't impose this. You're making a cherem when anybody doesn't agree with you. Or in the Rambam's writings. You can't do that. Try positivity. Withdraw the cherem, stop with the don'ts, and just emphasize learning. Gemara Rashi Tos is what we say today. It's a better idea and will dampen the passions and hatred. This is the purport of the letter of the Ramban. Now, the 40-year-old Ramban. It showed the awareness that things had gotten out of hand. But would his plea be heeded? Or would there be more burnings and mutilations? Let's wait for that for next time. Good night.